Hello, everyone who's joining us. Thank you so much for coming out tonight virtually to our special webinar about administrative fellowships. We are very excited to have you all here. And since we are right on time with all of our panelists, we wanted to go ahead and get started. So my name is Samantha Yang, and I will be your moderator for tonight's panel event on administrative fellowships. As a bit of background on myself, I am a recent MAJ graduate from the University of Illinois at Chicago, and I'm currently a first-year fellow at Emory Healthcare. So really quickly, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you at any point during tonight's webinar have any questions, please ask them in the Q&A section of the webinar, and we'll try to get through as many as we can tonight. Tonight's webinar is also being recorded, so we will share the link with all of the registrants along with a survey form to get your feedback on tonight's event. So thank you to all of you who attended our last panel event. It was called Building the Next Generation of Asian American Pacific Islander Leaders in Healthcare. I think if we switch to the next slide, we can see a picture of that event. Perfect. So Paula, Melanie, and Forrest provided some incredible insight into what it means to be an AAPI leader in healthcare. So thanks to all of those who attended that event and participated in it, we were able to raise and donate over $60 to the Asian Health Services Oakland Fund. If you're interested in viewing the recording of that webinar, you can access it by scanning the QR code, which was on the previous slide, and I'm sure it will be provided later on. So, all right. So with that being said, I want to welcome our panelists. Tonight we have Pridby Reddy, Azka Khawaja, Alyssa Na, and Jane Yang. So after each of them introduces themselves, we'll jump right into our questions. So Prudhvi, would you like to start us off?
Of course. Thank you, Samantha. Sorry, I'm trying to, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Pridby Reddy. I went to school at the University of Texas at Dallas. I received both my bachelor's and my master's degree from there. I started pursuing medicine initially, but my perspective changed when I took my first Intro to Healthcare Management course. At that time, my professor was a former healthcare executive, and he really inspired me to pursue this career. From there, I sought some internships to help me get more exposure to the field. So I worked at Emory Healthcare, UT Southwestern, UNC Health, which really gave me that experience and helped me build the narrative I needed to be successful in applying for a fellowship. Towards the end of my graduate career, I found out about HCA's executive residency program, decided to apply. I got in, and the way that HCA's residency program works is they kind of give you a couple of options and they kind of ship you out to a certain location. So as an executive resident, I was sent out to Riverside, California, where I spent about 1.5 years working at Riverside Community Hospital. And now for my next role, I am an assistant administrator currently at Corpus Christi Medical Center. Little info about the place where I'm at right now. So it's a system. We have 2 acute care hospitals, 1 behavioral health facility, and 3 freestanding ERs. This role has been, incredible so far. Definitely a step up in terms of responsibility and scope, but it's been a great journey so far. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. Azka, do you want to go next?
Yeah, of course. Good evening, everybody. My name is Azka, like Alaska, to help you all remember. I actually am from Oklahoma City. I went to University of Oklahoma for undergrad, and then I went to the College of Public Health, also in Oklahoma City. to receive my master's in public health, but with a healthcare administration and policy focus. Coming from a lower socioeconomic area, I've always been very interested in how the juxtaposition of medicine and healthcare, and also from the business sides, how those all interlace and interconnect. Similar to Prudhvi, I was also doing pre-med on the trajectory of going to med school, was accepted to medical school, and I had this summer where I went to Honduras on a global public health brigade. It was only supposed to be like a 1-week thing, and I just was really enjoying the work I was doing, that I decided to stay there for over almost a year in Honduras, and I deferred from medical school, and I just really understood that like that was where my passion lied. And once I came back to Oklahoma City, I did some research into a master's in public health, but I've always had a strong interest in the business side of things and how healthcare is run and operated. So it kind of made sense to jump into this point of my career in doing that. And so fast forward into grad school, looking into administrative fellowships, I'm just one of those people. I'm a lifelong learner, as much as I'm sure as all of you are on this line too. So it made sense to apply for the administrative fellowship program, and I ended up at City of Hope in Southern California. It's a comprehensive cancer center. I had previously done my administrative internship in Oklahoma City at also a comprehensive cancer center. It just ended up working out for me in that sense that I ended up there. My journey has been incredible. I'm working as an operations program manager now in the ambulatory operations realm of things, getting the opportunity to do a lot of project management alongside physicians, working highly in value-based care, and also working on merger and acquisition projects. So getting a good flavor of everything, but also getting the opportunity to get my hands in more of the day-to-day ops as well.
Fantastic. Alyssa, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Na. I'm a current first year, soon to be second year administrative fellow here in Rochester, Minnesota at the Mayo Clinic. I got my master's of health administration from The Ohio State last spring and got my bachelor's at the University of Rochester in New York. My bachelor's was in public health, and I took some time off between undergrad and grad to actually work in the space of public health with the Centers for Disease Control. Eventually made the transition over to health administration because it was actually in that role with the CDC where I got to really experiment a lot with project management and data analytics. And that was kind of where I really discovered that interest I had in digital technology and its relationship to healthcare. Coming into health administration, it's my goal to better bridge the gap between health administration and public health. I think COVID has really shown us that that infrastructure just really wasn't there. So hoping to continue building upon that. And you know, I think for me, I'm also just a very curious individual, like many of you are, and realized truly that patients do live at the core of institutional health systems, and health administration was a way for me to be put in a position where I could really just have that long-lasting, tangible impact on these different populations, particularly those who are underrepresented or come from lower socioeconomic statuses. So it's great to meet you all and looking forward to the conversation.
And last but not least, Jane, would you like to introduce yourself?
Love to. Thanks for having me. I apologize if there's any background noise. I'm in super fun DC. So I went to undergrad at UT Dallas as well, and we're 3 for 4 for pre-med. And I went into undergrad as a double major in biology and mechanical engineering because I thought that was a good choice. And year 3 or 4, one of my professors who I had 4 classes with sat me down, and she basically begged me not to become a physician. And after being deeply offended for about a minute, she continued on and introduced me to healthcare administration. And so I didn't take her seriously for another year. I took the LSAT, looked into going to law school, was thinking through all the ways that I could touch healthcare and the ways that I wanted to be involved. But I kept thinking system-wide and kept thinking the US healthcare system as a whole, and then becoming more and more fascinated with hospital operations as I was exploring my interests. And so I went straight into a master's program at VCU in Virginia, which is a 3-year program. So everyone here has finished their master's degrees except for me. because I'll be getting my degree at the end of my fellowship year. At VCU, I worked as a strategic sourcing analyst. I was able to translate some of the skills that I learned in engineering to my work there, and our team was able to save about $25–30 million for the health system, and it was really invigorating and empowering to be part of that, and I wanted more. And during my fellowship recruiting season, I was looking for something really special, and Inova was the place for me, and I'm really happy to be here now.
Wonderful. Okay, so thank you everybody for sharing. As you can see, we have a really diverse panel here with us tonight, and we are very excited to hear more of their experiences and insight. So once again, to all of you who are tuning in, thank you for coming. And for those of you who are new to the space of administrative fellowships, welcome. We hope that tonight's panel is going to provide meaningful insights as well as give a bit more detail into the life of an administrative fellow. So at a high level, hospitals, health systems, and organizations in the US offer 1 to 2 year fellowship to recent graduates of MHA programs, MPH programs, MBA programs, or other related degree programs. And fellowships provide aspiring healthcare administrators the opportunity to learn from a hospital's senior leadership team through project and/or rotation exposure. And each of those cycles have highly coveted positions because each hospital only selects a handful of fellows each year. And each year, the requirements to apply vary across the different organizations. So hopefully, through this webinar, we'll provide some clarity and guidance to help make the process easier for each of you to navigate. And with this in mind, we're going to dive into our questions. So our first question for tonight, Jane, I'm going to ask you to start us off since you recently finished the fellowship this last fall. So what was your search criteria when looking for fellowship opportunities?
The first thing was whether or not I qualified. Surprisingly, there are a few that don't accept students from 3rd year or 3-year programs. So you have to have your degree by the time that you apply or by the time the fellowship starts. So that was the first criteria. Secondly, the type of fellowship. And I mean that to be, who is my preceptor? Is it project or rotation based? Who will I be interacting with? I have a co-fellow, which I'm really grateful for. And then whether or not I could get the exposure and the experiences that I wanted out of this really special year where you're exposed to a lot more than you can get in other positions and other years during your career.
Do any of our other panelists, I think, Prudhvi, I see you're unmuted. Do you have something to contribute?
No, I think it's just really interesting, right? Why everyone's interested. I just think that, you know, a fellowship to me at least provided the best opportunity. I feel a fellowship is that accelerated pathway to leadership. And that's kind of my interest, one of my big focuses on pursuing a fellowship. And, you know, we're joined by a panel where everyone works at a great organization. So I think you really can't go wrong in where you choose. But going back to what you said, Sam, you know, these are very coveted positions. So, you know, whatever you can to improve yourself and really shape yourself for that opportunity, you know, will go a long way.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump into the next question because I think it ties into that first one really well. So the second question is, how did you know you wanted a fellowship? And this can kind of mean anything you want to interpret, but I think one thing I remember from the fellowship cycle myself is struggling with grappling with the idea of like a fellowship appealing to you. And so I'm curious if any of our panelists have any thoughts or memories from this application cycle that they went through. Alyssa, do you want to start us off for this one?
Yeah, so I actually applied for fellowships. It would have been 2 application cycles ago. So I think, I mean, I'll be quite honest, it was really challenging and certainly really difficult. And, when I think about why I wanted a fellowship, why I pursued a fellowship, I had mentioned previously that I did come from the field of public health, and that's kind of where at the time all my professional experience was in. And so for me, it was really important to pursue a fellowship and really get that experience in health administration before landing a full-time permanent position. I wanted to have the ability and the opportunities to really experiment and really explore an organization and explore interest within health administration before making, for lack of a better word, a commitment to a very specific department. Because of the work that I did with the CDC, I knew that to some extent, I was really interested in that big data, this idea of big data and data analytics. And so I knew that going into a fellowship and when looking at different fellowship opportunities, the conversations I had revolved around different potential project work that dealt directly with big data. And so I was really fortunate that, of course, a majority of the fellowships that I was looking at, checked off all of those boxes. But, another big important component was mentorship. Again, coming from public health, all of the colleagues and my entire network was from public health. And so I really had to build a support system of individuals who had gone through this path, this journey that I was about to embark on, and, be able to confide in them with questions, struggles, frustrations as I move forward in the application process. So.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. I definitely think that's a really good point. I think a lot of times the advice you get when applying to fellowships is to really self-evaluate. And I love that you just touched on that and how you used your experiences from the CDC or from other volunteering and whatnot to really contribute to your application as a fellow. So I'm curious if, Jane, you have any insight on that as well, since you touched on how your fellowship, you've seen kind of other people finishing and you're still finishing. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Could you repeat the question, Sim, for me?
Yes, I can. So the question was, how did you know you wanted a fellowship and what made the idea of it appeal to you?
So I certainly have to do a fellowship residency. I have to be in one of these positions in order to get my degree, which not a lot of programs like that still exist. But I didn't have to compete for the national fellowships. And that really was a decision that I made because I saw a few really, really interesting organizations and fellowship structures that stood out to me. Either, their mission, vision, values resonated with me a little differently, or it was, for example, I am really interested in pediatrics. My background and my interest in healthcare really started with my family going through the pediatric health system with my younger sister. And so I knew that that was exposure that I wanted to have if I could. And so I did a little bit more focused application and research on organizations where I felt like that could be a possibility. Like you guys have mentioned, these are such coveted positions that I also knew that I might not get my first choice, or I might not get my second choice even. And so going toward that national avenue was a way to get exposed to organizations that maybe VCU hasn't had a presence in the last few years. And as well, I just got to meet a lot of really interesting people like Alyssa.
Fantastic. Again, really great advice. I think there's a lot of challenging components when it comes to fellowships. And like you just reminded us, each fellowship program can be different depending on where you are. So I think this, again, leads really well into the next question, which was, what was the most challenging thing you encountered during the application season? And what is some advice you would give to those who are tuning in tonight and might be experiencing that in the future? So Azka, I'll start with you for this one.
Yeah, thanks, Samantha. Great question. I think one of the biggest challenges for me was sort of trying to narrow down my list. I didn't want to apply just to apply. So really trying to sit down and research these places, these organizations was tough because you're sort of used to where you are. And obviously we all know the big names and we want to try to get those because, you know, you want that on your resume. Like I'm just being transparent. But at the same time, it was sort of doing the research on other organizations that maybe weren't familiar with, but really looking into what their mission was, what their value statement is, and seeing if that actually aligns with you. Setting up those informational calls with current fellows, fellow alums, and really understanding it from their perspective, what a good fit actually looked like, was very essential. And that was the most challenging part, because you're trying to do that at the same time do your personal statement. You're probably during that summer doing a summer administrative internship. So it's a lot of juggling and you're stressed out. So I think that was like one of the biggest pieces, was just trying to stay organized and figuring out a good number of where to apply and really understanding what your personal and professional goals are, and looking at location. So that was something I really looked into. Coming from Oklahoma City, I knew I wanted to get out of the South, so I definitely applied as a location base, but also looking at organizations in those areas of seeing what resonated with me, especially from a public health perspective. So really figuring out like what matters to you and seeing if that's in an organization was a big piece of kind of overcoming that challenge.
That's really great advice. And I can definitely say that I think a lot of people do very similar things in terms of looking towards the vision and the mission of where they're applying. So I know that was something that I learned later on in my fellowship application. So I'm glad you brought it up because it's definitely an important component. We'll also get to some questions about work-life balance and staying authentic when writing your personal statements. But before we switch questions, I wanted to ask if Prudhvi, you had some thoughts on this question or wanted to share anything.
Yeah, I can say a few things. One, just general pointers here. One, I would say to start early as you can, because as you get closer to the deadlines, again, if you do have a well-defined list of organizations where you want to apply that Azka said, I think you'll be good. But I think setting clear expectations and really starting early will help make a very strong application. Me personally, something that I found challenging was writing my personal statement. I just think that, that level of introspection that you need to, put on paper took a while for me to develop. And, going back to what you said about being authentic, right? Anyone can go into healthcare because you want to make the world a better place or you want to make change, But I think really taking the time to really understand why you want to do this and how your experiences can help the organization move forward and how you can create a change within that organization while also, fulfilling your own goals. I think really paints a really good picture. But essentially, I'd say to start early and really take some time to develop your personal statement.
Okay, so I'm going to piggyback off of that, and I'm going to ask, you just talked about staying authentic when writing your personal statement and how that could have been challenging and how you felt like time was kind of the essence in that. So I'm curious if you have any tips, and to the rest of our panelists, feel free to jump in and think about any tips that you have thinking back to your personal statement. But Prudhvi, would you say that in addition to making sure you have time and have a well thought out plan, that it's also important to tie in experiences, or what other things did you kind of factor into your personal statement when you were struggling to kind of get it on paper?
Yeah, I think, I definitely didn't go about this single-handedly, right? You kind of start with a draft. I had multiple people read it, had professors look at it, but I think in a personal statement, you want to build a story that paints a really good picture of who you are, what you bring to the table, tie in your experiences. Someone talked about going to Honduras, working at the CDC, really talk about an idea or some sort of experience you've had that really instilled a change within you that made you want to pursue a career in healthcare, and really do your best to jot those words and thoughts down on paper. I think that's a really good start.
I'll have Azka kind of piggyback off of this, since you had a really unique opportunity to travel, and I think your story is something that a lot of people can relate to in terms of having an amazing experience that they maybe don't want to put on hold. So could you share a bit about how you factored that into your personal statement, or maybe didn't?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And a lot of what Prudhvi said was exactly how I took my approach with my personal statement, was really setting the stage and telling the story. Because as you know, all of us are sort of doing the same thing. We're in the same program, we're applying for the same job. And it's like, how do you set yourself apart? And it is kind of cashing in on things that you have done that are really passionate for you, because that really kind of helps level set your elevator speech whenever you do get an interview, and you can really speak to that experience. So that first paragraph has to be so eye-catching, but not over the top either, right? I tell this to other people that call me that are just mentees or people that need advice, is stay human. That was a huge piece as far as being on the other side, reviewing applications to hire new fellows, was the authenticity. Like, we can truly tell if you are human on paper, because it does resonate in your words, and if you really actually want to work for that organization. So I would just stay very mindful and truthful to who you are, and that fit will come forward. And I think a big piece of that was, from my example, was Honduras. That was a huge point of my life, a turning point for my career, to be having accepted going to medical school and totally changing that, but showcasing and telling the story in a way that wasn't like, oh, I just, gave up on med school because I thought being an administrative fellow would have been easy. So you have to market it in a way that makes sense, that shows that you're passionate, you're resilient, and you're persistent. And so you really have to play on your words and spin it. And I think that is probably the toughest part when writing your personal statement, because you want to stay professional, but at the same time, you want the person reading it to get a read on you. And I just think it's so important to add the human touch, which was something that was lacking in applications that I read. And the ones that I did read that had it were people that were top choices. So I think that is something people miss out on. They're very analytical, which is great on paper, giving us your biggest strengths. But I think tying it back to your passion, it will get you very far. So that would be my advice in this personal statement aspect.
I really appreciate that, again, because I can relate to it as well. When I think back to last year around this time, I think the biggest question in my head was, how do I make sure that I am giving the organization kind of what they want or what they're looking for, but also make sure that I'm, as you put it so eloquently, staying human and staying real and true to who I am at the core and at the end of the day. So our next question kind of goes along with that. You guys are doing so well. All the questions are flowing from one to another. So Alyssa, I'll ask you to start this one. The question is, what are some good questions to ask interviewers during that networking process to help you better understand the organization and if it's a good fit, but then to also help you kind of maybe weave in certain attributes of that organization to your personal statement or to your interview answers?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my experience, right, the people who are interviewing you have either served as a mentor in that specific fellowship program, or they've gone through the program themselves. And so I always like to ask them why they continue to be involved with the program. Most times, right, it's a volunteer position. A lot of times people you're not required to serve as a mentor once you finish the program. And so I'm always interested to hear why people still stay connected to the program. Another question that I like to ask, as I'm sure many of you already know, I always ask about the retention rate. It's really important to me to know why people stay with an organization or why they leave. And if for whatever reason the retention rate isn't as high as you had thought it would be, a follow-up question is always, well, why do people tend to leave the organization? And kind of just really understanding, the numbers that are associated with that specific fellowship program. I also really like to know about different project work and the impact that that specific project had on the organization. So if you're speaking to someone who did go through the program, and if they're able to still talk about their project work, and oftentimes it's work that they've carried forward, that in itself kind of illustrates the type of project that you're going to be able to get involved with, but also, right, the amount of work and the types of people that you have the opportunity to collaborate with, which speaks volumes to really, the potential that you have within that organization, as well as that fellowship program. And then, of course, I like to get to know them as a person. We are so hyper-focused on the business of healthcare that we forget about the business of people, right? This field is really, at its core, it's about the people, right? It's about the relationship building. And so getting to know people on a personal level, like what fills their cup, what inspires them, what motivates them, what frustrates them. I think a lot of us transition from other disciplines into health administration because something really probably upset us and there's something that we really want to change. And so understanding what that story is for every individual, I think is really important.
Absolutely. Those were a lot of amazing tips. I think a lot of people can probably relate to what you were saying in terms of being frustrated with the healthcare system or just feeling lost in it. And Azka, you made that really relatable just when you shared about your experience just now. So I thank you for that. Jane, I know you popped back in, so I'd love to get your input on this next question. So we were talking a little bit about questions to ask during the fellowship, but I know that when you're applying, it's a very stressful time in terms of juggling your work-life balance and making sure that you yourself are doing well and staying balanced. So I'm curious, in your fellowship recruitment process and fellowship work experience, how have you been able to manage work-life balance? And what are some tips and tricks that you might have to share with our listeners tonight?
Be a really good sleeper, and seriously, practice really good sleep hygiene, especially when you're stressed. Put down the phone, cut off completely. Probably nothing's gonna burn during your fellowship recruiting season if you don't check your email or constantly click on stuff at night. For me personally, I leaned pretty hard into my hobbies with cooking and cooking adjacent things. So I like knives, I like cutting boards, I like all the accoutrement that comes with cooking. And I just spend time with people who honestly give me life and make me feel like I'm fulfilled and like I'm seen. I think there's a piece of the fellowship recruitment season where they're going through so many interviews that you start to feel kind of I guess discouraged at times when you know that you're interview number 35 out of 55. And so being around people who really see you and know you is really special during such a stressful time that you're visible because of interviews. And just have fun with people that you're meeting. You'll run into them again at some point during your career and make a connection and figure out what they like, and like Alyssa said, what makes them tick as well. And that'll enrich your relationships and make this work a lot more meaningful too.
That's really great advice. And I want to ask Prudhvi or Azka to maybe jump in, because now you guys are officially past fellows. Prudhvi, you're an assistant administrator, and Azka, you're a program manager. So how does work-life balance perhaps shift from that administrative fellow track, or do things stay the same?
Do you want me to go ahead? I can start. Okay. It was an interesting time actually ending the fellowship because it was in the midst of COVID. So it was business as usual, which was incredible to be a fellow at that time and transitioning out of that position because we were all hands on deck. I think a biggest piece of the work-life balance, having a co-fellow actually, she became my work wife, she still is my work wife, and having each other through the process actually made things much more seamless and more sane. But as I transitioned into my new role, it was completely remote. none of us were coming to campus, and it was sort of figuring out that boundary of being at home and then also working at home. But I will say that was the hardest part, because it was like, you know, you're doing nothing at home, so you might as well just open up your laptop and answer a couple of emails, and then a couple of emails turns into getting a slide deck done that was not even supposed to be done till next week. And then you see other people online and they're like asking you, oh, can you do this? And it's like, it needed to stop, and you just need to do it for yourself, sort of thing. And it was like, if it was a certain time, I just closed my laptop, put my work phone away. I was just so used to having my work phone with me all the time that I just needed to tell myself to put that away and put it on silent, and just, like Jane said, like, the work's going to continue, nothing's going to blow up, nothing's going to fire up like when you're working. So it's like the work will always be there. So I think the biggest piece for me was sort of just turning things off. People will stay online, like the higher executive leaders, they have more on their plate, they have more that's keeping them up at night. And I just had to realize, like, I'm there to support them, and I'll always be there to support them, but I need to do what's best for myself to be a better leader the next day. So close your laptop, go to a happy hour. That's sort of my approach and my mantra of doing things. So it's worked out, and I've gotten a lot better about it. So yeah, I'll pass it to Prudhvi.
That's a great response. Thank you. And just adding on to what Azka said, look, there's, you know, you're always going to have 24 hours in a day. You know, and as you start advancing in your career, you're only bound to take on more responsibility. Your plate's going to be even more full. But I think really taking time to decompress and having time to yourself is very important. Yes, you will still get inundated with emails. You know, your inbox will be flooding, but I think really taking the time to, you know, just do you, have that peace of mind where you can get away from it all. And, you know, I thought Jane touched on a great thing, right? She tapped into her hobbies. I joined a social tennis league, a social basketball league, something that I can do outside of work, right? To where I don't have to think about work just for those couple hours, and I do something that makes me happy. I think that'll go a long way. And also, I think right now in my current role, I'm really fortunate to be working with a group of individuals here who also, you know, take the time to, you know, let loose and, you know, have fun outside of work too. Yes, my boss pushes me and he's very hard on me, but, you know, at the end of the day, we can also grab a beer or go to a baseball game after work and, you know, talk about non-work stuff. But as you enter healthcare, as you enter your fellowship, it is a very, very demanding position. You are expected a lot, but I think taking that time to decompress and, you know, find something to relieve your stress, I think that's a great thing that you could do.
Those are fantastic tips, and ones that I will definitely personally take into account as well as I start my fellowship. I think you both touched on, or you all touched on, some really great characteristics that are really important in fellows, right? We obviously want hardworking individuals and dedicated individuals, but we also want individuals who live a life so they can help our patients do that as well, and to help care for them in the most holistic sense. So I'm going to actually shift over to the audience Q&A. As a reminder to anybody who's listening, if you want to submit a question, you can do so in the Q&A section of the Zoom. One of the questions that we had was, what qualities or characteristics should one highlight in cover letters or personal statements? And I think you guys all touched on this in different ways, but I want to address the cover letter portion because I know that that was something I think many people in my cohort struggled with, is how do we make our cover letter different than our personal statement and highlight different skills? So maybe Alyssa, we can start with you.
Yeah, the cover letter, quite honestly, was probably the most difficult for me. You know, you have one page of such a limited amount of time to really give a high level overview of, you know, what you bring to the table and why you want to, you know, be a part of the table. I think for me, you know, a lot of times when I, you know, even for the internship process, the question that kept on coming up was, why did you transition from public health to health administration? So I kind of knew going into the fellowship application process that that question was going to pop up again. So to save more time to answer other questions, I made sure to answer that in that cover letter. And so the cover letter focused a lot about, I kind of touched on it earlier, but the frustrations that I had with public health and what really pushed me to go into health administration. Talking a little bit about specific work I did with the CDC. I had the opportunity to be in a position where I was providing direct patient care, but was also on the other side analyzing some of the data. And there was just so many gaps and so many areas of improvement that I was able to speak to, different perspectives in one specific role. And, certainly I was privileged to have that. But on that cover letter, after I don't even know how many drafts, I was kind of able to really craft it and perfect it to be really concise, but unique, right? Going back to what makes me really unique. And I think, for another one of my cover letters, it was a little risky, but it definitely made me stand out. I think, have fun with it when you can. And, if you really want to be a part of an organization, if something really stands out to you about an organization, there are so many different ways to do storytelling, right? There's a cover letter, there's a personal statement, but for one organization, I actually submitted a poem. And so, if you're feeling it and you feel like you can tell your story and, that's the way that you express yourself is through poetry, definitely would encourage that. But my advice, if you decide to go that route, is certainly talk to someone, that is part of the review panel and ask them if that's okay. And then see what they have to say and then go from there.
I'm going to tag on to that because there's actually another question that somebody submitted. You were just talking about how you share your experiences and express yourself. One of the questions that we just got in is asking, if my healthcare experiences tend to vary from other people that I know. How can I make myself feel more confident in talking about those, make them unique? But then also, can I bolster those experiences with more personal experiences or non-healthcare related ones? So I don't know if any of you guys want to just jump right in. If we could get maybe 2 people to do this, maybe a current fellow and a past fellow, that'd be awesome.
I can jump in. I actually recall getting an applicant who worked in social media. And I think it's so unique the way that she did tell her story was from her lens and how she could look into healthcare. And also her past of working in social media and technology was really cool because she actually got to work with drones and gave an idea of leveraging drones in the hospital setting, and looking at each exam room. It was an idea that she had was looking at changing something in an exam room, and you have 12 exam rooms. It's instead of someone a manager walking in each room, taking notes, looking at it, it's you send in a drone. It's ambitious, but she was you can send a drone in each exam room and take pictures, take videos, and then you could review the footage instead of having someone actually go there when they could be doing something else. So I think if you are someone that has a different work experience, you should leverage and use it to your advantage from a positive perspective, because people in healthcare, this is such a dinosaur industry. It took us forever to get to working in a hybrid structure, working from home. At least from my end, a lot of my leaders were like, what is that? And seeing you boots on the ground is the only way we know you're doing a good job, right? So it's sort of our job now in this early careers realm, if you have something you've done, really using that to your advantage and illustrating how that can be beneficial to that person in healthcare. What is the benefit to them and how can they make that to their advantage? So that would be my advice, to really play on that.
I treated part of my personal statement as sort of bridging the gap between some of the seemingly unrelated experiences that I had on my resume. And so honestly, this application is really unique in that you get to do that. Sometimes you can, add a little bit of it in your cover letter, but I felt like the personal statement was a great way to show the narrative of my experiences and the way that it took me, to healthcare and then through leadership and what that meant to me. And so I would say using those written materials as an opportunity to tie that back into why you're a value add for an organization is is pretty important.
Definitely. I like what you just said about adding value to the organization and how to tie it back in, because I think that's something that is really challenging, like many things that we've talked about tonight, to do, but it is really important. And actually, there's another question that asks, should we be looking at long-term organizations when we want to work? And I think that directly ties into that. So Jane, I don't know if you have something to elaborate upon that, or maybe Prudhvi, if you want to share from your past fellow experience.
Something that I definitely paid attention to, it wasn't like a yes or no criteria for whether or not I was going to apply, was where do the past fellows end up? And what are they doing? Did they get to pursue what they wanted to do? Or was it maybe a very directed path that, you know, everyone gets the same title after the fellowship or something like that? But I just lost my train of thought. Okay, someone can talk.
Yeah, I can bounce off of that. Just kind of adding to what Jane said. I think, yes, looking at things long term and growth is one thing, but I think first, like getting the opportunity, getting your foot in the door, I think is the most important thing. And you know, from my experience, HCA Healthcare is a system of 184 hospitals across the country. You are bound to get shifted a lot, and there is opportunity for you at some place. So I think that was definitely some sort of a safety net that I had going into it. And like it already happened, right? I know in my cohort, there were a couple of fellows who ended up becoming assistant administrators at the same hospital that they were initially at. That wasn't me. You know, when going into this fellowship or any fellowship, I think you do have to be somewhat geographically mobile, and kind of, you know, embrace the opportunity that comes your way. You know, from day one, really take the time to learn as much as you can, be that fly on the wall, absorb, and then, you know, when an opportunity arises, you know, be ready to pursue it, given that you want it, but just be ready to go after it.
I like the idea of being mobile, because that was something I definitely struggled with. And I think a lot of people I know applying for fellowships also did, is how mobile do I want to be? You almost think of it like a scale, right? Am I going to go all the way on the other side of the country? Am I willing to do that? Do I apply to a rural community hospital where I may not have a city that I'm used to? All of those things are definitely great things to consider and remind yourself of during fellowship. One other question that we have, I know we're coming to the end of time, so I want to get a few more in, was how many fellowship applications would you suggest to apply for? I don't know if Alyssa or Azka, you want to jump in and get this one?
Yeah, I don't, my answer is pretty short. I don't think there's a right number. I can share, you know, from my experience, I applied to 8 across the country, and I was barely able to manage that. You know, I consider myself to be pretty organized and pretty on top of things, but it was so stressful, and it was logistically, I mean, a nightmare, because I applied to both NAPCAS and non-NAPCAS. But, you know, I do have colleagues who applied to over 12, and, you know, they were fine. And I certainly had others who applied to less than what I did, but, you know, they're a little bit more stressed. And so, you know, what's best for you, and you know what you're capable of. You know, I'd say to anyone, cast a wide net. You know, apply to, I would say, more than 3 if you know, you have a criteria, but after that amount, you know, it's kind of up for you to decide.
Yeah, I kind of mimic what Alyssa just said. It is really up to you and what you want to do, but it is a lot of tailoring your personal statement, your cover letter for each organization you apply to. So just keep that in mind. If you sort of copy and paste it for each place, we will notice it'll be very evident. So just be careful on that. But I agree in the sense of, you know, shoot your shot, because if you really do want a fellowship and you're willing to go through the process of applying to like 10 or more places, then just know it will be very stressful. But if you're willing to do and ready to do it, just know to keep it creative, keep it unique, and keep it very authentic.
Excellent. Okay, so a bit of a challenge question. You might remember this from fellowship interviews yourself. The question is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I'll kind of tag on to this and say there was another question asking, like, what is a dream position? Where are maybe all of you guys at in terms of that kind of thought process? Have you started thinking about that? Are you already there? Maybe Prudhvi, we can start with you.
Yeah, sure. And I'll be completely candid here, but I'd say in the next 5 to 6 years, I would like to become the chief operating officer of one of the HCA hospitals here. I think they really take the time to grow you, give you the experience that you need, and also provide the mentorship opportunities to help you get to where you want to be. And in a place like this, being ambitious is definitely something that's looked at in a very high light. They want someone who's a go-getter, someone who's willing to, do what it takes to get the job done, and just being realistic with what they want to do. But yeah, I'd say, in the next couple of years, I definitely want to be in charge of operations at a hospital.
Yeah, I can add on to that. I don't know what the role would be titled, but if I had it my way, I'd love to work in a space that allows me to utilize big data to come up with effective digital strategies that target underrepresented communities. So again, going back to this idea of better bridging the gap between public health and health administration, I would love to also have some sort of time allocated to working directly within communities and, kind of being boots on the ground. So, based on conversations I've had with current colleagues, it sounds as though people who do take on those responsibilities tend to fall in positions that are titled like chief health equity officer. You have individuals that are vice chair of research who lead those efforts. And so, maybe the position that I want to pursue doesn't exist yet, but, the nice thing about Mayo Clinic and, a lot of other organizations is they're constantly changing, right? We're putting this huge emphasis on diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as innovation. And so, we see this across the landscape that brand new positions are being created. And so maybe there's one to be created for me.
I'll definitely add to what Alyssa said too. It's very synonymous to how I feel. I obviously want to continue being a steward for my community, being a steward for patients, and growing in that field. But being an Asian woman and being in healthcare is tough in itself, especially wanting to go into the trajectory of being an executive. It's tough. So it really is up to our generation to bridge that gap. And I definitely want to continue working in day-to-day operations, continuously improving the system that our patients access. That is essentially so key. And so whatever that can help, whatever I can do to help achieve that, that's kind of where I want to go. And also kind of working and really moving forward in the community. And I feel like at least organizations just don't do enough in that space of things. We don't make time to really look outside of our current areas that we are. And I really want to continue doing that for lower socioeconomic areas and seeing how we can provide more resources. So somewhere in that sphere, maybe taking some time off working globally too, has always been something I've wanted to do later in my career too. But yeah, see where life takes us.
For me, it depends on who I am in 4 years, probably. I feel like my interests change a lot, but probably going to narrow in somewhere in hospital operations. And then if I go strategy route, I'm really, really interested in human capital. I think the healthcare workforce is an oncoming, if not already here, crisis for our industry. And I guess thinking through what ways we can transform our workforce and how we build them, and then honestly what we do to them when they're working for us, right? So I take provider and healthcare worker burnout very, very personally and seriously, and so that's one of the areas that I'm also interested in. So really on the human capital side, if I'm strategy or just somewhere in a hospital having fun, if I go into the hospital operations side.
Amazing. That was very cool to hear and definitely very eye-opening because I think we're all constantly learning within the healthcare field what opportunities are out there for us. And Alyssa, you shared about creating a position. I think that's a really great reminder that healthcare is growing. There's always something to be done by somebody new. So with that being said, Prudhvi, Azka, Alyssa, and Jane, I want to thank you all so much for your time this evening and for sharing your thoughts. You've provided all of us with some really great insight and reminders and tips on how to best prepare for this fellowship journey that many people here are embarking on. So on behalf of the Association of Asian Healthcare Leaders, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And before we wrap up this session, I wanted to send off everybody with a quote by the renowned Chinese American cellist Yo-Yo Ma. And the quote is, "When you learn something from people or from a culture, you accept it as a gift, and it is your lifelong commitment to preserve it and build on it." So hopefully we will continue learning about administrative fellowships, other professional opportunities, and future webinars. So if you haven't already, please join our LinkedIn group, the Association of Asian Healthcare Leaders, or AAHL or AL. The panel, along with myself, are all very active on LinkedIn, and we want to welcome everybody to join us there and to stay in touch by connecting with us. And if your question wasn't answered tonight, or you have other questions that come up, please feel free to reach out and ping any one of us. We are all very excited to see how many of you apply, and wish you all the best of luck. So thank you, everybody, and have a good night.